You think this seat is yours? Charlotte Winslow's voice rang out sharply as she swept into the corner office, heels clicking confidently against the polished wood floor. The air seemed to tighten, coiling around the long mahogany table and the floor-to-ceiling windows that offered a dizzying view of the city below. Everyone in the room paused mid-motion, pens hovering over notepads, coffee cups momentarily frozen, and eyes flicked nervously between her and the figure at the doorway. Marcus Thompson, the black CEO of the company, stood tall despite the sudden intrusion, a calm presence in the storm, his tailored suit fitting perfectly yet unassuming, his hands resting lightly on the sleek leather strap of a briefcase. He didn't move at first, allowing Charlotte's boldness to fill the space, measuring her with quiet intensity, noting the subtle tension in her shoulders and the deliberate smirk on her lips. The sunlight glinted off the gold watch on her wrist as she leaned back, tilting her head, the expression on her face daring anyone to challenge her authority. Marcus exhaled slowly, letting the silence stretch, each heartbeat echoing like a metronome against the quiet hum of the city outside. The receptionist at the far end of the room cleared her throat but didn't dare intervene, her eyes fixed on the unfolding scene, lips slightly parted, reflecting a mix of anticipation and awe. Marcus stepped forward, his polished shoes barely making a sound against the marble floor, his gaze steady and unyielding, and as he walked, he recalled the countless meetings where he had been overlooked, the subtle dismissals from colleagues who assumed inexperience and the whispered doubts about his capability based on nothing but perception. He allowed a small, almost imperceptible smile to form, not from arrogance, but from the knowledge he carried, documents carefully organized in his briefcase, evidence of ownership and authority that Charlotte had completely underestimated. She noticed the slight movement, her brow furrowing in a subtle shift, and for a brief moment, the room's dynamic began to wobble. Marcus finally reached the center of the office, placing a hand lightly on the back of the chair she had taken, his posture relaxed yet commanding, and said in a calm, clear voice, "Charlotte, I believe you might want to check your facts before making assumptions." The words hung in the air, precise, deliberate, forcing every listener to pivot their attention fully toward him. Charlotte's confident grin faltered slightly, a flicker of doubt passing over her otherwise composed features. Marcus opened his briefcase, pulling out the neatly arranged folders, letting the crisp paper rustle lightly as he laid them on the table, pages revealing the legal confirmation of his position and ownership. The atmosphere thickened, tension palpable, the sunlight now falling directly onto the documents, highlighting every seal and signature, reflecting off the polished surface of the table and catching Charlotte's eyes, her pupils dilating just enough to betray her initial shock. Marcus held his gaze steady, unwavering, a silent command asserting itself over the room, and the staff shuffled slightly, unsure where to focus, as whispers began to ripple, almost imperceptible but spreading like a subtle current of realization. Charlotte's fingers twitched lightly over the edge of the chair, a nervous counterpoint to the calm certainty Marcus projected, her previously unchallenged confidence beginning to erode with each passing second. He leaned slightly forward, maintaining eye contact, his voice lowering just enough to cut through the ambient noise. "I own your company." The statement firm yet understated, carrying the weight of truth that could not be contested. A stunned silence enveloped the room, Charlotte's lips parting minutely, as she tried to formulate a response but found none adequate. Marcus straightened fully, standing tall, the lines of his face relaxed, projecting strength without aggression, letting the revelation speak for itself. The office seemed to breathe differently, the energy shifting, subtle glances exchanged among colleagues, some nodding slightly in acknowledgment of the balance restored, others simply frozen in the wake of the surprise. Marcus's calm demeanor contrasted sharply with the momentary panic that flickered across Charlotte's expression, the sunlight catching a small glint of her bracelet as she shifted, realizing the full implication of the words. He allowed a slow, deliberate pause, the weight of ownership settling in the room, every eye drawn to him, and then took a single step back, letting the scene settle into an uneasy equilibrium. Charlotte's shoulders slumped almost imperceptibly, a quiet acknowledgment of the reversal without the need for confrontation, and the room began to resume its normal rhythm. But the memory of the moment lingered, charged, a pivot point in the dynamic that no one could ignore. Marcus picked up the folder gently, closing it with a soft snap that echoed lightly, a subtle punctuation to the climax, and gave Charlotte one last measured look, eyes steady, inviting reflection rather than resistance, leaving the office heavy with the silent realization that authority, patience, and knowledge had quietly reclaimed what was always his. Marcus Thompson closed the briefcase slowly, the metallic click resonating softly against the polished marble floor, a subtle punctuation to the tension that still hung thick in the corner office. He adjusted the cuff of his sleeve, his eyes scanning the room as if measuring the ripples left by Charlotte Winslow's stunned expression. The sunlight shifted slightly, casting elongated shadows across the conference table, catching the edges of the documents and glinting off the crystal water glasses that trembled lightly from the residual energy in the air. Marcus took a deliberate step back, letting the silence stretch, each heartbeat echoing faintly in the minds of the staff who now sat rigidly in their chairs, pens forgotten, screens paused, breaths shallow and measured. Charlotte's fingers hovered over the table, her knuckles whitening slightly, a quiet counterpoint to the poise Marcus exuded. She opened her mouth to speak, but paused, the words faltering under the weight of realization, and for a brief moment, the office existed in a delicate suspension where time itself seemed to slow. Marcus's gaze remained unwavering, a subtle mix of authority and patience emanating from him, commanding without overt force, guiding the energy of the room to acknowledge truth without confrontation. He moved toward the window, letting his reflection in the glass merge with the sprawling city beyond, a visual reminder that perspective and vision were his allies, long cultivated through late nights in offices lit by fluorescent hum and early mornings reviewing strategy notes with a precision that few noticed but all respected. Charlotte shifted slightly in her chair, the heels of her shoes scraping lightly against the polished wood, a nervous rhythm betraying the composure she tried to maintain, and Marcus allowed himself a slow, measured inhale, appreciating the subtle acknowledgment of reality settling in the room. Outside, traffic moved steadily along the avenues below, a hum of normalcy contrasting with the charged atmosphere inside, and the sound of a distant elevator chime punctuated the moment, grounding the scene in tangible everyday rhythm. Marcus glanced down at the papers again, his fingers brushing the edges, organizing them with deliberate care, each movement calm, controlled, and yet quietly commanding, and then he looked at Charlotte, the faintest hint of a smile tugging at the corner of his mouth, not triumph, but certainty in knowing that the facts could not be denied. The receptionist shifted slightly, drawing in a quiet breath, glancing at the other staff who now exchanged subtle nods, a silent communication passing between them, a recognition that the hierarchy had quietly corrected itself. Marcus turned toward the table, laying a hand lightly on the polished surface, his posture still relaxed but commanding attention as he spoke softly, almost conversationally. Let us review the figures together, allowing the room to absorb the weight of accountability without overtly asserting dominance. Charlotte's eyes followed every motion, the tight line of her jaw softening imperceptibly as her confidence recalibrated against the steady rhythm of Marcus's measured presence. He picked up a pen, rolling it lightly between his fingers, then set it down, a simple gesture of control and focus, demonstrating that authority and composure could speak louder than confrontation. The sunlight now angled across the floor, catching the edges of Marcus's jacket and reflecting subtly on the glasses and metal accents in the room, casting light on the quiet acknowledgment in Charlotte's eyes as she realized the balance of power had shifted not through volume or spectacle, but through clarity, presence, and the patience honed over years of careful observation and strategic foresight. Marcus took a final, slow step toward the doorway, letting the air settle, his reflection in the glass remaining, a reminder of both his calm and his unspoken command. Leaving the office in a state of poised recognition, the room still charged with the aftereffects of revelation, the staff leaning subtly into respect and consideration, Charlotte frozen for a heartbeat longer, eyes tracing every movement, absorbing the lesson that authority could be claimed without aggression and that composure and truth had quietly restored equilibrium, a moment suspended between understanding and acceptance, leaving everyone in the room with the unspoken acknowledgment of Marcus Thompson's measured and undeniable presence. Marcus Thompson stepped toward the large floor-to-ceiling windows, the cityscape beyond a canvas of morning light reflecting softly on the sleek surfaces of the corner office. He paused, resting a hand lightly on the smooth glass, feeling the subtle vibration of traffic below, each distant honk and engine hum blending into a muted rhythm that contrasted sharply with the charged energy in the room. Charlotte Winslow remained seated, her posture rigid, hands folded lightly on her lap, eyes following his every movement, the faintest crease of uncertainty marking her forehead. Marcus exhaled slowly, the air moving subtly around him, his reflection merging with the towering skyline, as if to remind everyone of the balance between patience and authority. He turned slightly, allowing his gaze to sweep across the assembled team, noting the quiet exchange of glances, the pens resting abandoned on papers, the slight leaning forward of colleagues who recognized the gravity of the moment. Each subtle movement spoke volumes. No one needed to announce allegiance, yet the room had shifted irrevocably. Marcus's hand drifted to the back of the chair that Charlotte had previously occupied, fingers tracing the polished wood, a silent assertion of presence without confrontation. Charlotte shifted in her seat, the sound of her shoe against the polished floor a soft punctuation in the otherwise measured silence. Marcus's voice broke gently, almost conversationally, carrying the weight of authority without aggression. Let us proceed with the review, so that all facts are clearly understood. The words, calm and deliberate, commanded attention, settling nerves while reinforcing his control. He opened a folder, the crisp sound of turning pages echoing slightly, letting the documents speak where words were insufficient. Each signature, each chart, each highlighted figure a quiet testament to the structure and truth underpinning his leadership. Charlotte's eyes flicked down to the same pages, her lips parting slightly, then closing again, the recognition of oversight dawning with subtle intensity. Marcus leaned against the edge of the table, the polished surface cool beneath his fingertips, and let a small, controlled smile form, acknowledging that the lesson had been imparted without the need for spectacle. Light shifted as the sun rose higher, casting angled shadows across the room, dancing lightly over the documents, reflecting off the gold trim of Charlotte's watch, and catching the polished edges of glass and metal throughout the office, a silent stage for the demonstration of measured authority. Marcus moved slowly toward his seat, the briefcase tucked under his arm, setting it down with careful precision, then pulling a pen to annotate notes with deliberate intent, each mark intentional, each motion reinforcing the clarity of command. Charlotte remained seated, absorbing the rhythm of the exchange, the subtle cues of dominance and respect interwoven, realizing that influence could be conveyed through composure and knowledge rather than volume or spectacle. Marcus glanced once more around the room, ensuring that every subtle signal of authority had been communicated, every colleague attuned to the restored balance. And then he allowed himself a moment to look directly at Charlotte, a gaze steady and unflinching, conveying confidence tempered by patience, leaving her to process the full weight of the realization. Outside, the city pulsed with life, unaware of the quiet triumph and the subtle shift in power within the glass walls of the office, while inside, the room settled into a new cadence, the previous tension giving way to an unspoken acknowledgment of truth, presence, and quiet resolution, a moment suspended between acknowledgment and acceptance, where authority and integrity quietly reclaimed their place without a single raised voice or overt display, leaving Charlotte seated, contemplative, and the staff quietly attentive, all under the steady, composed guidance of Marcus Thompson. Marcus Thompson allowed a quiet moment to settle over the room, the subtle hum of the air conditioning mingling with the faint rustle of papers and the soft tapping of heels as Charlotte Winslow adjusted her posture, the tension in her shoulders still palpable, yet beginning to shift into something more contemplative. The sunlight filtered through the large glass windows, highlighting the polished surfaces and casting long, soft shadows across the sleek conference table, each edge reflecting the quiet authority that now occupied the space. Marcus moved deliberately toward his chair, fingers brushing over the smooth leather, his movements unhurried yet precise, a demonstration of controlled focus rather than haste, each motion measured to reinforce the calm command he embodied. He turned slightly, allowing his gaze to sweep the assembled team, noting the subtle glances, the half-smiles, the nods exchanged silently between colleagues as they processed the undeniable clarity of his presence. Charlotte shifted again, a quiet acknowledgment of the reality she was facing, her eyes tracing Marcus's every movement, noticing the faint tilt of his head, the steady rhythm of his breath, the unspoken confidence that radiated without arrogance. Marcus picked up a pen from the polished surface of the table, rolling it lightly between his fingers before setting it down gently. The small motion, a punctuation mark in the measured cadence of his control, reinforcing the notion that authority and presence could be communicated without overt words. He glanced back at the documents, reviewing the figures with deliberate care, highlighting key points with a precise, fluid motion, each annotation a subtle reminder of his meticulous attention to detail and the thoroughness that underpinned his leadership. The room remained suspended in a quiet tension, Charlotte's composed exterior beginning to soften as the weight of understanding settled, the subtle rise and fall of her chest indicating the internal processing of a lesson imparted not through confrontation, but through clarity and calm presence. Marcus allowed a slow, deliberate exhale, the sound merging with the muted hum of the office environment, and he moved to adjust the window blinds slightly, the sunlight shifting across the floor and reflecting off glassware, papers, and the faint metallic accents of pens and laptops, creating an almost cinematic effect, a play of light that mirrored the subtle transformation in the room's dynamic. He stepped toward the door momentarily, pausing to allow a gentle shift in energy, ensuring the staff absorbed the demonstration of calm authority, his reflection merging with the glass panes to emphasize the quiet but absolute command of presence over volume. Charlotte's hands rested lightly on her lap, fingers flexing subtly, the faintest exhalation escaping her lips as she recalibrated, understanding that the balance of influence and recognition in the room had quietly yet irrevocably shifted. Marcus returned to the center of the room, standing for a moment with hands lightly folded behind his back, shoulders relaxed yet commanding, allowing the space to acknowledge the presence of leadership grounded in composure, strategy, and quiet assertion rather than spectacle. The soft ambient sounds of the office, the low murmur of distant conversations, the gentle hum of computers and printers, the faint shuffle of papers, served as a backdrop to the concentrated attention now focused on Marcus, each staff member processing the shift in energy, the recognition of authority communicated through measured presence. Marcus gave a subtle nod toward Charlotte, not in reprimand but in acknowledgment, a silent recognition that understanding and respect were emerging, the lesson clear without a single raised voice, leaving the room in a state of poised equilibrium, where patience, clarity, and the understated demonstration of competence had quietly restored the rightful balance of authority, presence, and mutual acknowledgement. Marcus Thompson moved slowly toward the polished conference table, letting each step resonate softly against the marble floor, the subtle echo blending with the gentle hum of the city beyond the floor-to-ceiling windows. His eyes remained fixed on the neatly arranged folders, the data contained within them precise and indisputable, each page a quiet testament to his authority and careful preparation. Charlotte Winslow shifted slightly in her chair, the faintest crease forming between her brows as she followed every movement, the weight of comprehension settling over her in gradual waves. Marcus placed a hand lightly on the table, feeling the smooth surface beneath his fingertips, allowing the subtle texture to ground him as he organized his notes with deliberate care. The sunlight fell at an angle across the room, reflecting off glassware, pens, and laptops, highlighting the space in warm, natural tones that contrasted with the cool steel and polished wood, and casting long, soft shadows that seemed to stretch and bend around the silent staff watching the exchange unfold. He picked up a pen and ran it lightly across the margins of a page, the crisp sound of ink meeting paper sharp yet soothing in the quiet room, each stroke measured, deliberate, a reflection of his steady, methodical presence. Marcus's gaze lifted briefly to the city skyline, letting his eyes absorb the rhythm of life outside before returning to the interior, observing the subtle shifts in posture and expression among his team, noting the slow, almost imperceptible nods of acknowledgment as comprehension and respect took root. Charlotte's hands flexed slightly in her lap, her fingers brushing against the smooth fabric of her suit, the faintest exhale signaling the dawning awareness that her assumptions had been flawed, that the balance of authority had quietly but irrevocably shifted. Marcus set the pen down, fingers lingering for a moment, a simple gesture emphasizing patience and control over haste or display, and allowed a measured pause to let the room internalize the lesson imparted through quiet command rather than overt instruction. He adjusted his stance slightly, shoulders relaxed yet commanding, projecting a presence that was calm, assured, and unmistakably in control, drawing attention without demanding it, each movement reinforcing the clarity and steadiness that underpinned his leadership. The staff, previously tense, now leaned subtly forward, attentive to the rhythm of his demeanor, absorbing the nuance of authority communicated through posture, measured action, and quiet confidence. Charlotte's eyes followed each motion, noting the subtle poise, the gentle assertiveness, and the unspoken command woven into every deliberate step, her own composure gradually giving way to reflective recognition, rather than resistance. Marcus lifted one hand lightly, gesturing toward the documents on the table, inviting a collective focus, allowing the information to speak for itself. The carefully curated figures and charts a silent reinforcement of the structure and clarity that governed his leadership. The sunlight shifted again, soft beams illuminating the room, dancing across polished surfaces, reflecting off subtle metallic accents, and highlighting the quiet transformation taking place. The room now attuned to the unspoken lessons of observation, patience, and measured authority. Marcus stepped slightly back, maintaining eye contact with Charlotte, a calm and steady acknowledgment of the shift in dynamics, allowing her space to absorb the full weight of the understanding without the need for further commentary. The team exchanged subtle, silent signals, nods and half-smiles confirming the recognition of composure and leadership in action, while the ambient hum of the office continued, grounding the scene in reality as the balance of influence, respect, and quiet command settled firmly into place. Marcus took a final, deliberate breath, allowing the room to feel the steadiness of his presence, leaving Charlotte seated, contemplative, and the staff quietly attentive, all absorbing the unspoken affirmation that authority was being exercised not through spectacle or volume, but through preparation, clarity, and the understated assurance of a steady, unwavering leader. Marcus Thompson felt the subtle shift in energy as the room absorbed the weight of his presence, the sunlight glinting off the polished surfaces and catching the metallic edges of pens, laptops, and the gold trim on Charlotte Winslow's wristwatch. He moved deliberately to the center of the conference table, the soft scuff of his shoes against the marble floor punctuating the quiet tension that hung thickly around the room, each staff member caught between anticipation and acknowledgment. Charlotte remained seated, her posture slightly more tense now, eyes tracing every motion with a careful attention born of cautious respect. The small exhale she let out betraying the subtle recalibration of her confidence. Marcus opened the top folder from his briefcase and slid it across the table, letting the papers settle with a gentle rustle, the crisp edges aligned perfectly, as if to visually reinforce the order and precision that underpinned his leadership. He allowed a slow, measured glance across the assembled team, noting the soft murmurs, the faint nods, the subtle shifts in posture that indicated comprehension and acknowledgment without the need for verbal affirmation. Marcus's hand drifted lightly to the chair Charlotte had vacated, resting for a moment on the polished surface, a silent gesture of the presence and authority he now fully commanded, yet without need for confrontation or spectacle. Charlotte's fingers flexed slightly on her lap, a subtle response to the quiet assertion, her jaw tightening imperceptibly as she processed the depth of control and preparation that Marcus exhibited. The sunlight angled through the windows, catching the reflections on the glassware and metallic accents, creating a pattern of light that danced across the room, highlighting the calm decisiveness in Marcus's posture and movements, and framing Charlotte's slowly shifting expression as the realization of oversight settled fully. Marcus reached for a pen and rolled it lightly between his fingers, then set it down again. The deliberate, controlled gesture reinforcing the rhythm of authority he maintained through presence rather than overt instruction. He lifted his gaze toward the city skyline beyond the windows, the sprawling view grounding the moment in tangible reality, while simultaneously reflecting the scope of his responsibilities and the measured control he exercised within and beyond the room. The office staff observed quietly, some adjusting their posture subtly, others exchanging minimal glances, all attuned to the understated power and clarity Marcus projected, the rhythm of his calm confidence setting the tone for the balance now firmly established. Charlotte shifted in her seat, heels brushing lightly against the polished wood floor, the faintest click echoing as she processed the unspoken lesson, her shoulders straightening slightly as understanding replaced the initial surprise, a quiet acknowledgment of Marcus's methodical authority. He moved slowly toward the large whiteboard along the side wall, placing a hand lightly on its edge, scanning the information displayed, the calm rhythm of his motions contrasting the previously charged tension and inviting the room to follow the measured tempo of his guidance. Marcus gestured toward key points on the documents with a controlled, subtle motion, allowing the figures, charts, and highlighted notes to communicate clarity, accuracy, and the thoroughness of preparation, his presence reinforcing trust and confidence among the staff. The ambient hum of the office, the soft shuffle of papers, the distant sound of elevators and faint traffic outside, all framed the quiet authority Marcus maintained, each sound a gentle punctuation in the orchestrated environment he controlled. He took a slow, deliberate step back from the table, allowing space for reflection, his gaze sweeping once more across Charlotte and the assembled team, eyes steady, composed, radiating assurance without need for demonstration. Charlotte's fingers flexed lightly against the tablecloth, subtle movements betraying the mental recalibration, her breathing slow, measured, the quiet acknowledgment of the shift in dynamics visible in her posture, her eyes reflecting a growing awareness of Marcus's calm dominance. Marcus allowed the moment to linger, letting the quiet understanding settle, each staff member absorbing the clarity, precision, and understated command that defined his leadership, leaving Charlotte seated, contemplative, and the office filled with the silent recognition of authority exercised through preparation, composure, and the steady projection of unshakable presence. Charlotte Winslow shifted slightly in her chair, the faint scrape of her shoe against the polished wood floor echoing subtly across the spacious conference room, a delicate punctuation in the otherwise hushed space. Marcus Thompson stood at the head of the table, calm and deliberate, his gaze sweeping the room as he absorbed the subtle reactions of the staff around him, each glance, each minor adjustment in posture reflecting the dawning comprehension of his quiet authority. He extended a hand to the array of documents before him, his fingers brushing lightly over the pages, realigning them with meticulous care, the crisp rustle of paper barely audible, yet resonating with an understated precision that filled the room. Charlotte's eyes followed every motion, noticing the slow, deliberate gestures, the way his posture conveyed confidence without haste, the subtle nod of acknowledgment he offered to a colleague who had glanced up with tentative respect. Marcus adjusted his stance slightly, leaning just enough to catch the angle of sunlight reflecting across the polished surfaces, the glow illuminating the documents, and casting a pattern of light across the hardwood floor that seemed to dance gently, reinforcing the calm, controlled rhythm he maintained. He spoke softly, his voice carrying a deliberate clarity that filled the room without force. "It is important that we ensure every detail is understood and accurate." His words measured, deliberate, creating a cadence of attention that drew all eyes toward him, including Charlotte's, whose lips pressed into a thin line as she processed the import of his presence and authority. Marcus's hand moved over the tabletop, fingers tracing subtle lines along the edge, a grounding motion, demonstrating patience and focus while reinforcing the structure of leadership that had guided him to this point. The staff watched quietly, some adjusting their seating, leaning subtly forward, absorbing the lesson imparted not through admonition but through composed demonstration, recognizing the balance of poise, preparation, and measured action. Charlotte's breath was slow, steadying, as her shoulders relaxed imperceptibly, the faint shift signaling a subtle recalibration of her awareness, her posture aligning gradually with the new dynamic in the room. Marcus allowed a soft exhale, the sound blending seamlessly with the ambient hum of electronics, the muted shuffling of papers, and the distant faint echoes of activity in the office beyond the conference room, creating a sense of continuity between the quiet authority in the room and the broader rhythm of the work environment. He moved toward the windows again, the city skyline stretching out beyond the glass, a reminder of scale and perspective, fingers lightly resting on the frame, his reflection merging with the urban vista to underscore the steady, controlled confidence he projected. Charlotte's eyes tracked his movements, noting the subtle interplay of light and shadow on his figure, the precision of his gestures, and the calm decisiveness that radiated from him without the need for raised voice or overt assertion. Marcus turned slightly, glancing once more around the table, acknowledging the staff with a measured nod, a gesture that conveyed both awareness and respect, reinforcing the quiet yet absolute control of presence over spectacle. Charlotte's hands shifted lightly on her lap, the faint movement almost imperceptible, yet signaling the internal acknowledgment of a lesson communicated entirely through observation, focus, and subtle cues. Marcus allowed a long pause, the room absorbing the equilibrium he maintained, the sunlight catching the edges of documents, glassware, and metallic accents, highlighting the deliberate calm and authority that now defined the space. Each staff member seemed attuned to the rhythm he established, leaning into the quiet but firm demonstration of leadership, while Charlotte remained seated, contemplative, her expression reflecting the understanding that authority could be exercised with clarity, precision, and composed presence, leaving the room poised in a state of thoughtful acknowledgment. The dynamic subtly yet permanently shifted in favor of measured competence and deliberate clarity. Marcus Thompson remained at the center of the room, his gaze steady, allowing the subtle hum of the office to serve as a backdrop to the quiet command he projected. Charlotte Winslow's posture shifted slightly, her hands resting on the polished table, the slight tension in her shoulders betraying the recalibration of her confidence as she observed the calm precision of Marcus's every motion. He reached for the neatly arranged folders once more, letting the papers glide smoothly under his fingers, the crisp edges catching the angled sunlight that streamed through the floor-to-ceiling windows, casting intricate reflections across the polished hardwood floor and the metallic accents of laptops, pens, and glasses. Marcus's movements were deliberate, methodical, and unhurried, each subtle gesture a silent affirmation of control and measured authority, drawing attention without demanding it. The staff remained quietly attentive, their eyes following his gestures, noting the deliberate pace, the way his hands rested lightly on the table, the way he straightened a corner of a document as if reinforcing the order of the environment itself. Charlotte's eyes flicked across the documents, her lips pressed into a thin line, a quiet acknowledgment of the clarity and structure Marcus embodied, her breathing steadying as she absorbed the demonstration of competence communicated without spectacle. Marcus allowed a moment of stillness, letting the room settle into a rhythm defined by calm focus and understated authority, each colleague subconsciously adjusting to the quiet energy that now permeated the space. He glanced toward the windows again, the city skyline sprawling beyond a canvas of light and shadow, grounding the moment while simultaneously emphasizing the scope and weight of responsibility carried by his presence. Marcus moved back toward the table, fingers brushing lightly across the surface, organizing notes with meticulous care, each action reinforcing the poise and precision that defined his leadership, a subtle reminder to everyone in the room of the effectiveness of preparation, patience, and steady control. The sunlight shifted, illuminating the edges of the folders, the glint of metal on pens, and the gold trim of Charlotte's watch, highlighting the subtle interplay of light and space as the room adjusted to the quiet assertion of authority. Marcus spoke softly, his voice carrying clarity without aggression. "We will proceed with each item to ensure complete understanding." A measured cadence that drew all attention, reinforcing presence and focus while allowing comprehension to unfold organically. Charlotte's hands flexed slightly in her lap, her fingers tracing subtle patterns on the smooth fabric of her skirt, the faintest exhale escaping her lips as understanding replaced hesitation, the subtle recalibration of her confidence evident in the small shift of her posture. Marcus's gaze swept the room once more, acknowledging the staff with a slight nod, a gesture that communicated awareness, respect, and inclusion, reinforcing the quiet balance of authority achieved through calm composure rather than overt demonstration. The room seemed to breathe with him, the ambient hum of electronics, soft shuffling of papers, and distant sounds of the office outside forming a gentle backdrop that accentuated the rhythm of the moment. Marcus allowed a slow exhale, the measured cadence of his presence settling firmly into the consciousness of everyone present, each subtle movement, each quiet gesture, each calm word establishing an unmistakable impression of leadership defined by clarity, precision, and composure. Charlotte's eyes remained on him, tracking every slight motion, noting the unspoken confidence, the deliberate pacing, and the quiet authority that needed no amplification, allowing her to internalize the lesson imparted by observation. Marcus shifted slightly toward the doorway, pausing to allow a sense of space and reflection, letting the room absorb the equilibrium he maintained, and then turned his gaze briefly toward Charlotte, offering a steady, composed look that invited reflection rather than confrontation, leaving the office suspended in a state of thoughtful acknowledgment, a quiet recognition of presence, authority, and the subtle, enduring power of deliberate, measured composure. Marcus Thompson felt the room shift as the subtle realization took hold, the staff leaning slightly forward in their seats, attentive yet silent, their expressions a mix of curiosity, acknowledgment, and quiet respect. Charlotte Winslow remained in her chair, her posture straightening as she absorbed the depth of the situation, the faintest furrow appearing between her brows as comprehension and recalibration battled with pride and habit. Marcus stepped lightly toward the center of the conference table, fingers brushing over the smooth, polished surface as if reinforcing the order and structure he embodied, each movement deliberate and calm, yet radiating authority that needed no overt declaration. He glanced at Charlotte and the team, eyes steady, conveying patience and control while inviting observation and reflection, a quiet teaching moment unfolding without words of reprimand. The sunlight, now angled more sharply through the tall windows, reflected off the polished edges of documents, metallic pens, and glass water cups, casting a mosaic of light that danced across the floor and walls, subtly emphasizing the measured composure Marcus maintained. He allowed a slow exhale, the sound blending with the distant hum of city traffic and the quiet whir of office equipment, creating a steady backdrop that underscored the calm control he projected. Marcus picked up a pen, rolling it lightly between his fingers before setting it down, a simple motion that drew attention without demand, a subtle punctuation to the rhythm of authority he cultivated through patience and clarity. Charlotte's eyes followed each gesture, noting the quiet precision and deliberate pacing, the way he moved with purpose yet without haste, and the gradual softening in her expression suggested the recognition of competence and presence over display or assertiveness. Marcus glanced down at the folders, fingers tracing the edges, the crisp paper shifting slightly as he rearranged the materials, reinforcing the sense of control and thoughtful preparation that underpinned his leadership. The room remained silent, yet alive with an undercurrent of awareness, the staff's posture adjusting subtly, their focus sharpened by the quiet demonstration of measured authority. Marcus turned his gaze toward the city beyond the windows, the skyline sprawling in sharp clarity, the sunlight catching the reflective surfaces of nearby buildings, a reminder of scale, vision, and the weight of responsibility he carried within and beyond the office. Charlotte shifted in her chair, the movement slight but telling, the sound of her shoes brushing the floor a soft indicator of attention and processing, while her hands rested lightly on her lap, flexing subtly as she integrated the lesson of presence and poise. Marcus allowed a moment to pass, letting the ambient sounds of the office, the soft rustle of papers, the distant elevator chime, and the hum of electronics establish a rhythm that contrasted with the initial tension and reinforced the calm authority he maintained. He moved to the side of the table, placing a hand lightly on the edge, observing the staff with a composed yet attentive gaze, acknowledging their presence while demonstrating that leadership was as much about patience and preparation as it was about command. Charlotte's lips pressed together lightly, her breathing slow and steady, the subtle shift in posture signaling recognition and adjustment to the new dynamic, the room absorbing the understated but undeniable change in tone and authority. Marcus allowed a final, deliberate pause, eyes meeting Charlotte's for a moment of quiet acknowledgment, and then shifted focus briefly to the staff, whose subtle nods and attentive posture reflected the absorption of a lesson imparted through observation, clarity, and calm, leaving the room balanced, focused, and fully aware of the quiet but firm authority Marcus Thompson embodied in every deliberate movement and measured word. Marcus Thompson's hand rested lightly on the folder, fingers brushing the crisp edges as he opened it fully, revealing the meticulously organized legal documents that substantiated his authority and ownership within the company. The sunlight streamed through the floor-to-ceiling windows, casting sharp yet soft beams across the polished wood floor and the gleaming surface of the conference table, highlighting the pages with their stamps, signatures, and highlighted notes that each told a story of careful planning and unassailable facts. Charlotte Winslow leaned slightly forward, her eyes narrowing as she absorbed the information, the faintest tension visible in the line of her jaw as the reality of the situation settled into her awareness. Marcus adjusted his stance, shoulders relaxed yet commanding, allowing the weight of preparation, knowledge, and presence to communicate the authority that he had cultivated over years of careful observation and strategic decision-making. He spoke with a calm, measured cadence, each word precise and deliberate. These documents outline the structure and ownership clearly. Every detail is verifiable, leaving no ambiguity. His voice carried effortlessly across the room, quiet but heavy with certainty, inviting attention without demanding it, reinforcing the subtle power of clarity and preparation. The staff remained still, some leaning slightly forward, others adjusting pens or papers, each absorbing the calm assurance that Marcus projected, recognizing the shift in balance and authority with quiet acknowledgment. Charlotte's fingers flexed subtly on the table, the soft rustle of her skirt fabric the only sound betraying her processing, and her gaze flickered across the documents, tracing the precise figures, the signatures, and annotations that validated Marcus's position. The room seemed to contract and expand with the rhythm of the unfolding realization, the sunlight catching the metallic edges of laptops and pens, the reflections dancing lightly across the surfaces, emphasizing the subtle drama of measured authority. Marcus allowed a moment of silence, letting the information resonate, the subtle hum of electronics and distant city noises forming a soft backdrop that accentuated the gravity of the verification process. He shifted slightly, his eyes sweeping the room once more, making brief, steady contact with Charlotte, conveying patience, expectation, and a quiet insistence on acknowledgment without confrontation, a demonstration that the equilibrium of influence and presence had been restored. Charlotte's shoulders straightened imperceptibly, the small adjustment signaling a recalibration of understanding, a subtle recognition that the balance of control, credibility, and respect had shifted decidedly in Marcus's favor. Marcus picked up the pen again, rolling it lightly between his fingers, then setting it down, the minimal sound accentuating the quiet rhythm of authority, each gesture reinforcing the narrative of preparation, precision, and calm control. He moved one hand across the top of the folder, straightening corners and aligning pages with meticulous care, the tactile engagement reinforcing a visual message of order and stability, a silent testament to competence and deliberate presence. Charlotte's eyes followed every motion, the soft flicker of her pupils reflecting the dawning comprehension that influence, authority, and respect were being asserted not through volume or display, but through measured knowledge, calm composure, and meticulous attention to detail. Marcus allowed the pause to extend just long enough for the staff and Charlotte alike to fully process the import of the documents, the rhythm of silence filled with unspoken acknowledgment, subtle nods, and quiet respect. The sunlight shifted again, emphasizing the angles of the room, the polished surfaces, and the documents, casting gentle highlights that mirrored the gradual acceptance of the authority and clarity he embodied. He leaned slightly forward, fingers resting lightly on the folder, gaze steady. The minimal movement communicating deliberate consideration and patience, allowing Charlotte a final moment to absorb the implications without interruption, leaving the office enveloped in a quiet, thoughtful acknowledgment of truth, authority, and the subtle, enduring power of measured presence and meticulous preparation. Marcus Thompson stepped back from the table, allowing the weight of his words and the clarity of the documents to settle fully into the consciousness of everyone in the room. The subtle hum of the office, the soft shuffle of papers, and the faint clicking of keyboards outside created a quiet rhythm against which the magnitude of his presence resonated. Charlotte Winslow remained seated, her hands resting lightly on the polished wood, fingers flexing slightly as the internal processing of realization unfolded. Her eyes traced Marcus's every motion, from the way his shoulders relaxed yet conveyed unspoken authority to the calm precision with which he aligned the documents and handled each pen and folder, demonstrating the quiet mastery of preparation and leadership. Marcus allowed a slow, deliberate exhale, the sound blending with the ambient noises of the office, reinforcing the calm yet commanding rhythm he maintained. He moved his gaze around the room, briefly meeting the eyes of each staff member, nodding subtly, acknowledging their attention, their comprehension, and their recognition of the equilibrium that had been restored. Charlotte's posture shifted imperceptibly, shoulders relaxing as the tension in the space began to dissipate, the quiet acknowledgment of the authority he projected and the clarity he established settling in. Marcus leaned lightly against the edge of the table, fingertips tracing the polished surface, his calm presence radiating without effort, each motion deliberate and unhurried, reinforcing the measured tempo that now defined the office environment. The sunlight angled through the windows, glinting off glass surfaces, metallic pen clips, and the edges of folders, creating a pattern of reflections that danced subtly across the polished floor and table, emphasizing the quiet but absolute shift in attention and respect. Marcus spoke softly, each word measured. Every detail has been reviewed. Accuracy and clarity guide our decisions, allowing the cadence of his voice to instill calm authority rather than command. Charlotte's lips parted slightly, a faint exhale escaping as comprehension deepened, the realization of oversight settling firmly, and her hands flexed lightly against her lap, a silent acknowledgment of the lesson imparted through observation and patience rather than confrontation. Marcus allowed another pause, letting the room absorb the energy and tempo he set, the subtle interplay of light, reflection, and soft ambient office sounds creating a backdrop for the quiet recalibration of influence and presence. He glanced toward the city skyline beyond the windows, the vast expanse of buildings reflecting light and order, mirroring the meticulous organization and control he exercised within the room. Marcus returned his gaze to Charlotte, eyes steady and unflinching, conveying patience, expectation, and acknowledgment, inviting her to process the full implications without interruption, demonstrating that leadership was communicated through composure, preparation, and quiet confidence. The staff remained attentive, leaning subtly, exchanging minimal but meaningful glances, absorbing the equilibrium restored, the subtle rhythm of authority and recognition settling into their awareness. Marcus straightened fully, the deliberate alignment of his posture and the calm, measured motion of his hands reinforcing the notion that influence, respect, and authority were earned and maintained through clarity and presence rather than spectacle or volume. Charlotte's breathing slowed, her shoulders softened slightly, and the faintest tilt of her head suggested recognition and understanding, a recalibration of her awareness to match the subtle, commanding presence Marcus maintained. The office seemed to exhale collectively, the subtle shift in posture, gaze, and attention across the staff marking a new rhythm, one dictated not by assertion or demand, but by deliberate, composed demonstration of competence and steady control. Marcus allowed the silence to linger, the room attuned to the rhythm of quiet leadership, each soft sound, the rustle of paper, the faint hum of electronics, the distant traffic, underscoring the calm authority now fully acknowledged and internalized. Charlotte remained seated, contemplative, her eyes following every small movement, every subtle gesture, and every carefully measured word, understanding that the quiet but firm presence of Marcus Thompson had irrevocably established a new dynamic of recognition, respect, and composed leadership within the space, leaving the room in a state of poised equilibrium and thoughtful acknowledgment. Marcus Thompson allowed the room to breathe with the subtle shift he had orchestrated, stepping lightly toward the window to let the cityscape beyond offer a sense of scale and perspective to the quiet resolution unfolding. Sunlight filtered through the glass, illuminating the polished surfaces of the table and the carefully aligned documents, the reflections dancing across metallic pens, water glasses, and the faint edges of laptops, creating a rhythm of light that mirrored the measured calm Marcus projected. Charlotte Winslow remained seated, her posture slowly adjusting, shoulders easing as she absorbed the quiet but undeniable assertion of presence and authority. Marcus turned back to the table, hands resting lightly on the polished wood as he scanned the faces of the staff, noting the subtle nods, the quiet acknowledgement, and the shift in attention that confirmed the new balance in the room. His voice was calm, deliberate, and measured. "It is essential that clarity and truth guide every step we take, and I trust that we will act accordingly." Each word resonating softly, yet firmly, shaping the room's rhythm without need for overt insistence. Charlotte's fingers traced the edge of the table, her eyes moving between Marcus and the documents, the subtle furrow of her brow easing as comprehension and reflection replaced hesitation, a quiet recognition of the authority embodied through preparation and composure. Marcus moved with deliberate precision, arranging the folders with gentle care, fingers brushing lightly over the crisp edges, allowing the act of organization to speak volumes about order, meticulousness, and calm command. The office remained silent, yet the tension had shifted into a focused energy, the staff attentive to every subtle gesture, every measured step, and the rhythm of composure Marcus maintained, recognizing the power of presence reinforced by deliberate action rather than words alone. Charlotte shifted slightly in her chair, heels brushing softly against the polished wood floor, the faint sound marking her awareness and the recalibration of her stance, a subtle acknowledgement of the quiet authority Marcus conveyed without display or confrontation. Marcus's eyes swept across the room, pausing on each colleague, noting the half-smiles, the subtle exchanges of glances, the careful movements, all of which confirmed their recognition of the new equilibrium, a balance of respect, attention, and acknowledgement of the competence he demonstrated. He leaned lightly on the table, fingertips brushing the surface with methodical care, exhaling slowly, the soft rhythm reinforcing the steady, measured authority he maintained, allowing observation and patience to guide the absorption of understanding across the room. Charlotte's breathing had slowed, shoulders less tense, eyes reflecting the dawning realization that the balance of influence and respect had quietly shifted, her mind registering the importance of preparation, calm composure, and meticulous attention to detail as instruments of authority. Marcus allowed another brief pause, letting the silence extend just long enough for the nuances of gesture, gaze, and movement to resonate fully, the sunlight catching subtle glints of metallic accents, glassware, and the polished edges of folders, emphasizing the orchestration of calm and control he projected. His gaze returned to Charlotte, steady, unflinching, inviting reflection rather than prompting confrontation, a silent acknowledgement that the lesson imparted through deliberate action and quiet clarity had been received. The room settled into a rhythm defined by understanding, attentiveness, and measured acknowledgement, the staff now subtly aligned with the cadence Marcus had established, each movement reinforcing the equilibrium and subtle respect that permeated the office. Marcus took a final step back from the table, allowing space for reflection, letting the staff and Charlotte absorb the full impact of the demonstration of composed authority, presence, and meticulous preparation, leaving the office poised in a state of quiet, thoughtful acknowledgement, and the sunlight shifting across the polished surfaces cast a gentle, reinforcing glow over the room, signaling the enduring presence of deliberate leadership, careful observation, and the subtle power of calm command fully realized. Marcus Thompson stood by the floor-to-ceiling windows, the cityscape sprawling beyond reflecting the morning light in. Soft glimmers that danced across the polished wood and glass surfaces of the corner office. The room was quiet, charged with the subdued energy of realization, the staff seated attentively, pens resting, laptops closed or set aside, each absorbed in the gravity of the moment. Charlotte Winslow sat with her hands folded lightly on her lap, eyes tracing every subtle gesture Marcus made, her shoulders easing as comprehension slowly replaced initial resistance. Marcus reached for the edge of the conference table, fingertips brushing the smooth surface, feeling the subtle vibration of quiet anticipation and letting the calm assertion of presence resonate across the space. He allowed a slow, deliberate exhale, the soft rhythm blending with the distant hum of office electronics and faint city sounds, creating a measured cadence that framed the room in controlled attention. Marcus's eyes swept across the staff, meeting glances with a gentle firmness, acknowledging their focus while allowing them to internalize the nuances of composure, patience, and understated authority. Charlotte's gaze remained on him, a subtle nod forming, imperceptible yet signaling the internalization of understanding, her hands flexing lightly as she absorbed the magnitude of quiet mastery and deliberate precision in every movement and gesture. Marcus moved toward the center of the room, adjusting a folder on the polished table, fingertips aligning its edges with meticulous care, the crisp paper rustling softly, each subtle sound punctuating the measured rhythm of control he maintained. The sunlight shifted slightly, illuminating metallic pen clips, glassware, and the edges of laptops, reflecting light across the floor and walls, emphasizing the quiet choreography of authority and awareness that now defined the office dynamic. Marcus spoke softly, deliberately. Leadership is not about the volume of command, but the clarity and steadiness with which we act. His voice calm, yet resonant, drawing attention effortlessly and allowing comprehension to unfold organically. Charlotte exhaled slowly, her lips pressed together as the weight of understanding settled fully, her posture adjusting subtly, a quiet acknowledgment of the balance restored through deliberate action and measured composure. Marcus allowed the silence to stretch, letting each colleague absorb the lesson in presence, preparation, and patience, the quiet focus in the room underscoring the subtle power of calm command. He glanced toward the windows once more, the city skyline framing his reflection, a visual echo of the deliberate authority he embodied, each building and street below mirroring the structure, order, and careful planning that informed every decision he made. Marcus returned his gaze to Charlotte, steady and unwavering, allowing a moment of silent acknowledgment to pass between them, a quiet exchange that conveyed understanding, respect, and the recognition of competence without the need for words. The staff remained attentive, leaning subtly forward, absorbing the rhythm and tempo of calm, deliberate leadership, their postures and subtle expressions reflecting the internalization of focus and acknowledgement. Marcus allowed a slow, deliberate step back, creating space while maintaining the poise of presence, letting the room breathe, and allowing the equilibrium he had established to settle fully. Charlotte's hands rested lightly on the polished table, fingers flexing as she processed the lesson imparted entirely through observation, the quiet mastery of deliberate, controlled action, and the unspoken assertion of authority. The sunlight continued to angle across the room, glinting softly off the polished surfaces, glassware, and metallic edges, highlighting the nuanced energy of attentive focus, acknowledgement, and quiet respect now permeating the space. Marcus exhaled once more, steady and measured, eyes sweeping the room, briefly meeting each staff member, acknowledging comprehension, attentiveness, and quiet recognition, reinforcing the subtle but firm authority conveyed through patience, preparation, and composed presence. Charlotte's posture straightened fully, subtle tension eased, and her gaze reflected an unspoken understanding that influence, respect, and acknowledgement were established not through display or volume, but through clarity, composure, and deliberate mastery of presence. The office remained in a state of poised attentiveness, the quiet hum of activity beyond the room forming a gentle backdrop to the calm but undeniable assertion of authority Marcus maintained, leaving the space balanced, reflective, and fully aligned under his measured guidance. The subtle shifts of light and shadow across polished surfaces echoing the enduring presence of deliberate, thoughtful leadership.